The reputation of AAA games isn't in a favorable position. You couldn't probably make a more lukewarm statement, given the fact many recent big productions under-delivered in their expectations and feel like giant targets to make fun of rather than anticipating. I actually prepared a whole introduction to the topic filled with current examples, but needed to restructure the beginning of this video multiple times, because the industry turned into a competition of who can shock players with an even worse revelation. If it's not the newest hit piece of incompetent leadership or similar turbulences behind the scenes, then some games seem to plainly disappoint in view of the endless resources they appear to enjoy. Games hold your hand relentlessly, creativity has no place to flourish, and immersion dies thanks to countless markers on your screen, matching basically the number of layoffs this year. What's even worse is how I don't have to name a specific case. Throwing the term AAA into the room should be followed with neutral connotations, yet you will most likely think of an overloaded mess made for an extremely general market that doesn't even play games. And I haven't even mentioned all the questionable monetization models, coming across as a cheap alibi to excuse "that's the wrong footage." Obviously, I want to stress the fact not all big productions fall under that category, and some studios use their resources to release satisfying complete products, but this is not about your or my opinion. No matter if you enjoy, don't care or actively dislike AAA titles, players got expressively upset about the direction the medium is turning to. Watch any big gaming YouTuber and you will find at least one video about the disappointing state of modern gaming. It's a requirement for a gaming commentary YouTuber at this point. As a side note, all of this also applies to general modern gaming as such. I only use AAA games as a basis for a much wider problem, but sometimes you get the impression it's either AAA or nothing. Or quadruple A, an additional letter won't make people buy your game. Generally speaking, I'm not advertising against big productions. Sometimes popcorn gaming is all you need after a rough day. Some people enjoyed the most famous walking simulator Death Stranding to a high degree, because it struck the nerve it was set out to hit, and other players really appreciated the focus on actually walking and seeing how you transport objects over a rough terrain. Same with Tears of the Kingdom. Recent YouTube make you believe it's the worst betrayal ever committed to the series. Can't wait for the inevitable why it's actually a masterpiece videos in a couple years, because if you don't find enjoyment out of the building feature, a huge chunk of the game's appeal will simply slip right through you. The main difference is these are finished and polished titles. If us, talentless freaks, can't even rely on simple good popcorn anymore and receive raw, dry and tasteless popcorn that got even delayed in the microwave due to technical issues, and I have to pay an unjustified amount of costs to repair the problems, I'm going to set the sails instead. As it stands, I would like to simplify these seeming problems of modern gaming into 4 categories, covering most of the general articulated issues players have: the game's playtime or length, visuals and performance, cutscenes or cinematics, and the gameplay. The playtime needs no deep explanation, as everyone probably experienced a game one time that went too long. This goes for basically every production value, but AAA especially feels the need to justify its long development time with content plainly created to stretch out the length. This isn't necessarily the creator's fault, since many players are still of the opinion that the full price must be reflected in the playtime, whereas short, more concrete experiences start to show their benefit. The longest playthrough ever created is nothing worth if I start to forcefully tantalize myself. By finishing a game I cannot stop because I already invested so much time in it. The second one is visuals and performance, which can be highly individual depending on the person you ask. While the quality of graphics is up to taste, there's no denial many modern titles release unfinished technically and are plagued by significant frame rate issues, already aged visuals or straight bugs. Publisher bring them out in a clearly unfinished state and have to emergency save them months after initial impressions are depraved. Next we have cutscenes and cinematics, which isn't even a real problem based on your point of view. Some people enjoy cinematic experiences similar to the quality of a movie, but sometimes it's just too much, and the balance between interactable moments and the player watching without doing anything is too immense. I'm also talking about those walkie-talkie sequences, creating the illusion of gameplay by giving the player some moments to control the character, but ultimately pushing him so much into a direction there's no room to fail. And finally, of all the points, this is the most debatable one, but gameplay certainly does fall under a similar questionable reputation, as it lags behind in so many ways for various reasons. Sometimes you get the impression big studios studios all share the same template when it comes to designing their games, no matter if the respective genre fits the chosen style. Too many boring side quests, empty landscapes, streamlined combat, and a purely unimaginative copy of what worked before, without even reviewing what made the original idea work in the first place. So, what if I would tell you there's a certain series negating all of those problems and breathing fresh air into the gaming landscape with its uncomplicated yet evolving gameplay, creative ideas, accurate length, charming visuals, and an upcoming wave of titles, rising in their quality with each following successor? Well, you would hopefully listen. Kirby feels like the perfect antidote for modern boring gaming. A somewhat over-exaggerated statement to make regarding Kirby's legacy of appealing to unexperienced beginners, or very child-friendly tone, and I would normally agree if you asked me 6 years ago. Star Allies, the first proper HD Kirby title, released to mixed receptions and felt like another plain 2D platformer, in a franchise full of them. It wasn't special, noticeably imaginative, or memorable in any kind. The only people enjoying it were probably fans who recognized every Easter egg or callback to the past. Your typical Kirby title, as some players would point out, and I wanted to use the example to show I'm not pretending Kirby to be this magical franchise with no shortcomings or weaker entries whatsoever. But something happened after Star Allies came out. Years passed and there was not a single sign of another mainline Kirby entry apart from occasional spin-offs to fill the gap. This was strange for multiple reasons. Star Allies, a fully HD console title, released merely 2 years after Planet Robot on the 3DS, and Kirby was generally known for concise development cycles since 2011. What was taking so long to justify a waiting period of 4 years and no clear information on the future of the series? Well, the answer was the most successful and biggest Kirby adventure ever. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is his first proper big endeavor into 3D gameplay, after experimenting with smaller budget titles in the past. The perspective is new, gameplay redefined, and the sense of fresh new start palpable. This is the culmination of 4 years of hard work, making up for the initial first lackluster impression Star Allies left on the Switch. And what a smash success, not only breaking records for the series but reaching sales never imaginable. Currently, the game sits on almost 10 million sold units, or maybe even more, and seems to be consistently purchased throughout the Switch's last years. The reception was similarly positive, with fans as well as newcomers praising the long overdue bold new direction. To this day, I have never seen anyone thinking the Forgotten Land is underwhelming. You may have your personal nitpicks, everyone holds them, but it's one of those games universally agreed to be one of the best in the genre. Since it was such a success and clearly more ambitious than your typical Kirby title, here's how the Forgotten Land tackles each problem I introduced earlier almost perfectly to a degree. It felt like the creators had no pressure, deadline, or any troubles when developing a game so risky for the franchise. First is length, or rather short length due to Kirby's natural tendency to have comparatively brief adventures. Without 100% and collecting only a couple of optional unlockables, a regular playthrough of the Forgotten Land will probably take between 10 to 15 hours, and perhaps double the amount if you want to see everything. An acceptable time if you ask me, regarding how it's highly replayable, doesn't discourage a second run through thanks to quick tutorials and a 2-player mode emboldening to start a new save file with a friend. I understand people who do not have the money for every full price release and want to have something with more flesh to their bone, but I often like to raise the question, is it better to torture yourself through 100 hours of unamused boredom or 15 hours of pure quality that will at least stay in your mind? Cutscenes are similarly trimmed down to the absolute necessity, only presenting important moments like your first mouthful mode or essential story situations. In Kirby, we often have those pretty CGI cutscenes at the beginning and maybe end, but the Forgotten Land uses its higher budget to stage as many cinematography as possible, on top of regular in-game sequences. Still, you can skip them whenever you like and even ignore the story completely, since it's an enjoyable ride regardless of your investment in any kind of narrative. This is due to the excellent gameplay, elevating the classic Kirby fanfare into a new dimension and offering some of the best linear 3D levels. Even if places or ideas are recycled, they never come across as lazy, as every innovation is contextualized into a new premise, using their potential to the fullest without having to wait for a successor to polish rough diamonds. For instance, basically 90% of the copy abilities and mouthful modes are probably revealed in the first 2 worlds, leaving the rest of the game with reused concepts if you want to put it cynically. However, with this approach, the creators are allowed to introduce ideas earlier and escalate them throughout the campaign, or even combine them for the maximum effect. The part where I only partially advocate for the Forgotten Land are graphics and performance. Depending on what I show, it's either one of the most impressive titles on the Switch, with outstanding lighting and expressive character animations, or at this point, classic victim of suffering from the Switch's lacking power. Especially background objects drop in their frame rate, and unfortunately, the Forgotten Land cannot hit 60 frames per second, just like many other Kirby titles. I'm no technical expert, but I believe 60 FPS would have been possible, considering other demanding games managed to pull it off too, but it's not as disappointing as it sounds. Although 30 FPS, at least it runs at a consistent frame rate, and balances the average performance with the aforementioned grand shots. And despite the fact there might be some fast-paced brawls against some bosses, I never felt handicapped by 30 FPS, as the game does not rely on important inputs deciding over win or failure. Quite the contrary, Forgotten Land is most likely the best looking Kirby title to this day, and will remain timeless thanks to the somewhat realistic style mixed with expressive colors to have a slightly lifelike atmosphere, while keeping Kirby's vivid flavor. And to be fair, while the Forgotten Land seems to counter all those problems I described, I'm well aware of making a statement based on one game, and act like Kirby was always as excellent as his newest 3D title. On the outside, it's an accessible franchise for beginners, but not as perfectly received as by fans, which is why I want to bring an actual fourth problem. What a twist. Not only modern gaming, but Star Allies suffered from nostalgia. During the last decade, I started to develop a somewhat personal displeasure for games relying too much on nostalgia. Reminiscing the past, celebrating former accomplishments, and honoring the roots of winners may be a wink towards every loyal fan staying with the series since the beginning, but is an inelegant way of admitting the uncreative passion for something new. Of course, when used sparingly, nostalgia reaches the attendant effect and evokes feelings of better days, and I'm sure there are going to be times where I celebrate the return of former Kirby elements like a fanboy, but it should never become the driving force of an unseen adventure and only supplement new ideas. Nostalgia should not be the pitch of your new AAA production, but cleverly implemented appetizer to sell the new stuff to existing fans. Some years ago, I loved to hear familiar jiggles or encounter acquainted worlds. It felt like a safe way to ensure I enjoy the game in case all the new ideas cannot convince me, but after realizing the delight of the unknown paired with the element of surprise, I'm perfectly glad if a game has no callbacks whatsoever occasionally. Again, Star Allies mirrors that issue to the extreme, with the main selling point being iconic characters from the past, playable for the first time. Longtime followers will recognize the favorite rival and jump for joy with the prospect of controlling figures who try to desperately revive their loved ones. She's dead. But I'm not going to sugarcoat the clear reliance on a feature beginners to the franchise cannot fully appreciate. Once again, and to close the circle ultimately, Forgotten Land successfully averted this safe trap by exploring a completely unseen world. Not only for new players, but Kirby as well. Setting the game's premise in an environment of a lost human-like civilization was a bold move for the franchise, but the perfect template for a foreign atmosphere utterly alien to everything Kirby. The music consists of mostly new tracks, no reliance on familiar bosses, and only modest use of general Kirby elements show that whenever I have to describe parts of the Forgotten Land, I will describe something new. After seeing how Kirby seemingly counters the problems of modern gaming, I recognized something. I've been following the series since I can breathe, and even I always considered Kirby to be a relatively middle-sized franchise. Of course, it's one of Nintendo's most popular ones, but Kirby never broke through in a similar manner Breath of the Wild did for the Zelda series. I wish I could say the Forgotten Land fulfills that role, but with all those accomplishments I just listed, it still doesn't get quite the recognition I think it deserves. For example, the Forgotten Land is often compared to Super Mario 3D World, a game similar in playstyle and execution. Both titles consist of colorful environments, linear 3D levels, and the ability to play with a friend. However, without discrediting the quality of 3D World, I always regarded the Forgotten Land as a much higher quality experience in general. The genre and playstyle might be the same, but the Forgotten Land puts a higher emphasis on believable, realistic, and interesting worlds, introduces new ideas consistently, and is packed with meaningful collectibles and feels like a grand adventure into the unknown. To me and many other players, there was no longer a difference between the next Mario title and small little Kirby. Both stood head to head, raising the quality standard. Ironically, and as you have probably guessed at this point, the Forgotten Land shares some traits with actual AAA games. There are more cutscenes, a greater focus on cinematics, and a way bigger scope. When entering the game's first level, it seems like the camera shifts and the scene takes control over Kirby, but it's not. Despite how cinematically driven the title is in its approach to match the broad scope of 3D, you will never be annoyed or bored by any events happening, as they are brief positive enough to not overstate their welcome. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the general consensus. While highly praised, news outlets rated the Forgotten Land as an amazing step for Kirby, but seem to hold back with their judgment because it's socially more acceptable to be critical with Kirby. Of course, my personal bias plays into that perception, but if I had to describe Kirby's general standing in the industry, it would be, as I often like to mention, AA. Not a small franchise, proportionally known, but surely not a juggernaut. And even though I just complained about the strange notion Kirby might be somewhat of a lower franchise, it eventually doesn't really matter as long as the games are good. The only real problem I can see is how potential players dismiss the possibility of them enjoying a Kirby title due to stereotypes they believe. The Forgotten Land may be overall easy, but the difficulty was actually fine-tuned to a point. First-time players will have a handful troublesome moments. If there is what I like to call Nintendo difficulty, titles generally accessible to every player, there's also Kirby difficulty. Basically one step further in making a game easy. Forgotten Land falls under the first category since it doesn't play itself automatically like Star Allies and leaves more room for mistakes due to 3D gameplay. At the end of the day, the biggest reason why I consider the Forgotten Land to be the perfect antidote for modern gaming goes way deeper than mere gameplay elements I just listed. Remember the reaction to Astrobot for the PlayStation 5, the close-up of an otherwise lukewarm state of play, and the announcement of possibly the most uninspired game to ever open presentation with? It wasn't necessarily about Astrobot being a platformer, but simply a game. I'm not talking about the graphics, gameplay or character design specifically, but the condensation of every one of those aspects, resulting in what can only be described as a game. Expressive visuals, fun ideas and an impression that will remain memorable. Ironically, Astrobot shares basically the same genre as the Forgotten Land, but if you want a break from hyper-realistic modern boredom, Kirby and especially the Forgotten Land promises a future we can look forward to. So, was this the sneaky attempt to ride the train of simply complaining about modern gaming, despite the fact I don't really play them and just enjoy the stuff I know? Was I only trying to use a popular current problem and forcefully combine it with my Kirby bias to bring more people into the franchise? Always. Hi, I'm Channel Kirby. I'm excited to be here to talk about the newest addition to our membership lineup, Star Allies Pro, and how it advances the viewing experience. Star Allies Pro substantially improves over the regular membership in 3 ways. Here's what we call the medium-sized 3. First, we made emotes much larger and increased the artistic fidelity levels of the limited space they are using. The results are human-like expressions your pet is not able to distinguish by implementing the newest TegraFlex ATP Kumquat program. 75% faster. Second, we made major upgrades to the ray tracing, taking a streamlined approach to your viewing experience that allows calculations of the races and the traces at double, trouble, or even triple deluxe the speeds of whatever I was just saying. And finally, we added custom hardware for machine learning and switched to an AI library called Membership Ultra Nippy Felicitous Idiosyncratic Bespoke, or MUNFIB for short. MUNFIB analyzes my wish pixel by pixel and can add an extraordinary amount of detail, which boosts my wallet by letting me not commission anyone. Here's DDD should be evil again, see through the eyes of Star Allies Pro. It has huge amounts of detail and targets a super smooth 14.4p per second. Let's compare this to the viewing experience of the regular membership, which runs. I hope you enjoyed this run through of the technology behind Star Allies Pro. Simply put, it's the most powerful membership we have ever built and a worthy addition to the Channel Kirby family. Let me wrap this up by giving you a quick look at the number of benefits you will gain by obtaining this membership.